They throw you into a submarine like they throw a boy into the deep end of a pool, and then they wait to see whether you learn how to breathe in the dark. I was 21 when I signed the transfer papers and walked down into the foam and iron of a Soviet attack submarine. We called her by the project number, the way you call a beast by its breed. Project 641. NATO called them foxtrots. They were workhorses of the Northern Fleet and the Black Sea, slower and noisier than the big nuclear boats, but hungry and stubborn in the same way a man can be when he's pressed to survive on skill. They ran on diesel and batteries. They rode low and they breathed carefully. My job was mechanic, not the romantic job of the control room or the slick of sonar. I lived down where the metal got hot, pumps, valves, the diesel skin. The smell of hot bearings and fuel is the smell that says you are still in this world. On a boat like that, you learn quickly that the work is not just fixing parts. It's learning a language of noises, of temperatures, of shudders. If the main circulating pump sings wrong at 0300, the whole watch knows it before the gauges do. If a valve grunts 2 notes too many, a man gets his hands dirty until the note stops. That's where I belonged, under the soundboard, fingers oily, listening to the hull as if it were a throat. There was a list of small practical rules you learned in the first week. Never block a sea chest, tag a worn gasket, never, ever leave a wrench in a bilge. Then there was the rule that didn't fit the manual and didn't have the light of the torpedo room, the captain's warning. He said it flat and short, the way men hand out a remedy you refuse to ask for. Do not look through the periscope at dawn. Not a joke, not a quaint piece of superstition. When a captain says something like that, the way he said it, with the ridge of his voice grinding down the words, it becomes a law. A law on a submarine carries a weight a ship's bell cannot ring away. We all knew why he'd said it in the ritual sense. Periscope depth is exposure. You raise the periscope, you are a mast in the water, and masts are what radars and lookouts find. Modern airborne radars and patrol planes learn to spot masts even when they are tiny. Periscope detection became a specialty in post-war navies. The technical reality is simple and brutal. A periscope is a narrow column that must penetrate the air-sea interface to give you a line of sight. The more light at the horizon, dawn or dusk, the better the chance that the scope's profile scrambles contrast and becomes visible to observers and radar. There's nothing mystical about that. It's physics, it's risk. But the captain's warning carried a second tone. He wasn't just talking about radar or the danger of being seen. He was talking about the way dawn looks through a tube. He was talking about the thing you can see with your eye before your brain has the time to tell you what it belongs to. He was talking about an unease we would all come to understand, the kind that gets nested under your skin. The captain warned, and the warning sat like a small bruise under our skin, something you feel before you know the story. We were on patrol along a stretch of sea that ate light and returned cold. The watch bill was a carefully engineered misery. 6 hours on, 12 off, and the boat's life rearranged to the beat of the diesel. Periscope checks were ritualized. Short exposures, careful sweeps, camera ready, the appropriate code on the log. Periscope depth is not a casual thing. You bring the hull up to a place where the sail is a hair between the water and the sky, and the machinery hums in a way that makes your teeth feel like metronomes. If someone looks through a periscope, someone else watches the horizon and the radar and the instruments. A periscope is not an eyeball. It is an event. But the captain, old and pale, with a face like a stern gate, said, "Don't look at dawn." He told the officer of the deck to repeat it. He told the cooks and the mechanics and the sonar techs, "No looking at dawn." He framed it as an order and a secret. There are things dawn shows you that aren't for your eyes. He used the words "for your eyes" with a kind of personal possessiveness that made uniforms look like linen. Nobody asked him what that meant. On a boat, you learn that asking can sometimes be a way of swapping a private fear for a public execution. We obeyed the first time because the captain's voice had not yet had time to prove itself wrong. Early morning on a submarine is a thin, honed thing. The light outside is a smear before it becomes a world. The horizon is an argument between night and day. The periscope, when it crests, is a polished black tube that drinks the slightest glint. At dawn, the sea plays tricks, sun glitter, a bank of low cloud catching a line of light, and optical illusions where an ordinary wave reflects into a shape that looks suspiciously like a mast or a silhouette. The small magical fact of optics is that when the sun kisses the sea, contrast is everything. Even expert eyes misread a shimmer as a ship's wake or a distant funnel as a target. The captain knew this as a matter of tradecraft. But there was another reason he said don't look at dawn. The reason the cabin boy told me years later, half laughing and half not. He said, "You'll see more than you should. Dawn makes things honest. It shows the thin skin between what's real and what's committed by the night." I remember that line because with the honesty he named came the first tiny break in our crew's confidence. Dawn isn't just light. On a periscope, it becomes truth, and sometimes truth is the most dangerous thing. A mechanic's life is filled with practicalities, belts, bearings, oil temps, the dull click of a valve. Yet we were sailors too, and the ocean makes sailors quick at stories. The periscope rule became part of our vocabulary. We joked at first, captain's new superstition. We used the warning to tease the sonar men who liked to peek. We dared each other once, and then stopped when the silence of the boat made the dare feel obscene. At night, in the mess where we ate thin soup and listened to one another, we'd push small tokens of courage into each other's hands, a cigarette stub, a half-whisper. The one that accepted the dare would climb to the periscope and then refuse to take a look. We added bravado to the ritual like a bandage. Jokes are a way to test the edges of a rule, to see whether it has teeth. The first thing that made the rule real wasn't a ghost or a mystical revelation. It was technical and straightforward, and therefore somehow more terrifying. Something on the periscope camera recorded a frame that could not be explained. Corby, our radio tech, careful as a man with a scalpel, pulled the periscope camera reels after a routine sweep. His job was rarely dramatic. He labeled tapes and checked for scratches. That morning he set the reel into the splicer, and we watched the frames like lazy gamblers at a table. There was a single frame, one blink of film that showed a figure at the horizon that no instrument anywhere else registered. The automatic radar echoes at the bridge showed nothing. The sonar had no contact. The optical periscope image registered a human silhouette standing on the water as if the ocean had a person in it for one frame. I remember the room fell a little inward. The men joked that Corby had left the lens cap on. He didn't laugh. We ran the frame again. There was no jitter in the film, no double exposure. The frame had the grain of reality, sun flare, the smear of spray, and very briefly, a figure. Not blurred like a bird, not shaped like a distant mast, but unmistakably upright like a man on an unseen deck. One frame, one heartbeat, and nothing else to say. Optics can lie, the young navigator said, squinting at the desktop printout. A lens flare, refraction, sea spray caught wrong. He sounded like a man trying to make a mechanical diagnosis to save his knees the pain of belief. The captain snapped and asked for the tape to be cross-checked with the bridge camera and the sea state logs. Bridge logs said the sea was flat as a plate. The meteorologist's note said a thin veil of mist, nothing to obscure or create illusions. Sonar logs were empty. The skipper's glove tightened on the tape like a hand closing on a razor.
We could have rationalized. We tried to rationalize. Sailors are excellent professionals at stitching a seam over a breach. But what made the image heavy was not the image itself. It was the timing. It was dawn. We were meant to be avoiding dawn peaks. The image appears at the one time the captain told us not to look, a coincidence that tastes like a trap. The captain called a closed meeting. In the small, gloomy wardroom, he said something that made men who had been able to sleep with a belt under their pillows suddenly believe in unwritten punishments. If you look at the periscope at dawn and you see something your reason cannot explain, you do not speak about it unless you are ordered to. You sign nothing. You place the tape in a sealed envelope and you hand it to me. It was a command and a test. He was trying to keep the seam quiet and small. The ship needs to act as a machine first and a community second. Secrets aboard a submarine are like small engines that leak oil over time. They will stain. A captain's instruction is a lid on a pan that's beginning to boil. I learned the periscope's mechanisms because a mechanic learns the machine by taking it apart. A periscope is elegant in its brutality. Mirrors, prisms, a shaft that must remain rigid through the boat's flex. It's a column through which the top of the world and the bottom of the world try to meet. The periscope's optical train gives you a thin, precise window. Naval manuals, the ones the Royal Navy printed and the ones our designers peered into decades ago, warn continuously. Daylight exposures are risky. A periscope must be exposed briefly. You must sweep swiftly. The manual that older petty officers quoted, we had a translated booklet dog-eared in the radio room, said periscope exposures should last only seconds and be synchronized with the lookouts and the radar. There is no romance there. It is a list of things which, if broken, get men dead. So we obeyed, mostly. We kept our exposure short. We kept our heads down. We ran drills to make periscope times surgical. Raise, sweep, lower. We synchronized watches. We did the mechanical things right. Yet the human thing, curiosity, the itch to know whether the horizon hides a boat or a drifting crate, is an animal. It pushes and paces and then sharpens. The temptation to look was like a hunger. Technicians can obey procedures with their hands while their eyes betray them. Then the small human disasters began. It was nothing cinematic. Nobody screamed. There were no midnight battles. The first one was a look, an accidental look, and the second was a changed man. Petty Officer Semyon, who had hands like piston rods and a laugh like a diesel cough, was up for the 0420 sweep. He'd been snapping at the rigging for weeks, irritated and tired. The periscope came up. He did his sweep, and for less than a second he held the image. He closed his eyepiece and sat back like a man who'd been slapped. He didn't speak. We were trained to police one another. He was the sort of mechanic who would laugh you flat in the engine room for missing a gasket. He went below and lay down and didn't come to breakfast. A day later, he was different. He took apart things with a slowness that made us all uneasy. He avoided the periscope watch like someone avoids a bar after a bad argument. He stopped singing on his workbench. Most unsettling, he kept talking about the dawn sky as a thin edge and about seeing a face that belonged to the ocean. We pulled him aside. He said he had seen nothing except a shadow at the horizon, nothing that would explain the way his hands had gone cold. He kept touching the periscope's cap like a talisman. Looking sometimes changes you more than the thing looked at.
Another man, small, quiet Pavo, confessed at last watch that he had seen through the lens a shape that was not a ship, a figure walking on the sea, as if the water had a deck. He told his confession to the bunk wall because he could not say it to a man's face. The confession spread like a rumor and then like a wound. We tried technical fixes. We recalibrated lenses. We checked seals. We ran the mast through maintenance, greasing the bearings and checking the counterweights. All the mechanical boxes were ticked. The periscope was sound. The optical path was clean. Nothing should make a human silhouette breathe on the horizon, yet men spoke in certain tones now, the tones of men who had touched something porous. You can believe all the manuals you like. Raising a periscope is dangerous. You also learn in your marrow that some dangers are not just mechanical. They are social and psychological, and the sort that a manual cannot glove. When the captain told us not to look at dawn, he was, by the end, trying to shut a door no manual had ever considered. When the manuals stop covering what you see, the rest is improvisation. The small incidents mounted. Men who had joked now kept a silence like an unbuttoned coat over their faces. We all watched the logs for a pattern. What time did the frames with anomalies occur? Dawn and dusk. What sea state? Flat. Were there other boats? No. Did the radars show signatures? No. Was the periscope glass scratched in a way to produce artifacts? No. The only thing consistent was light. On a patrol near the Barents that felt like a place where light came to test your patience, the tape that made the captain pale was left in an envelope on his desk. Corby, careful and pale, had slipped the reel into the wrinkled paper as ordered. The envelope had a single note, not to be opened except in presence of the captain and the XO. We sat in the wardroom that afternoon under a fluorescent light that looked clinical and slightly judgmental, and the captain slid the envelope toward him with two hands that trembled, like the hands of a man holding a prayer book. He set the reel on the player, and we watched as a thin, gray image crawled to life on the small monitor. Horizon, sun, a sudden ripple, and then again a flicker that resolved into a person standing upright on a seam of ocean. The frame was so brief it could have been a trick of the film, but the captain paused the player and said, almost as a confession, "We were told not to let the dawn show us who it keeps." A captain who confesses in public broadcasts that secrecy is a burden that belongs to everyone. After that meeting, the order hardened. The captain issued a standing protocol. No periscope exposures between first light and 20 minutes after sunrise unless a senior officer approves. That is a mouthful of words that translate cleanly to a machine schedule. But the line also served to keep men from looking with the small locus of their curiosity. The rule was not military prudence only. It was a protective superstition dressed in regulation. We kept watching for a time. We kept the watches like men balancing spoons on the edge of a bowl. Men who disobeyed were not punished publicly, but they were given harder shifts, more cold deck duty, and the captain's cold eye would find them in the mess like a small stone. That kind of discipline is more efficient and meaner than a court-martial. It erodes a man slowly. Punishment in a closed space is the slow erosion of a man's life. I will not pretend we were all saints. On a late watch, the topper among us, a young petty officer named Igor, stumbled up the ladder and hovered at the periscope
like an addict hovering at the edge of a habit. He pressed his eye against the cup and watched the sea wake like a hand through water. I could see his shoulder move like the twitch of someone hearing a private radio. He lowered the eyepiece like a man who had seen something too personal. He walked away and later told me he had seen a child standing on the water, a small thing that looked like the boy who used to climb the bulkheads at his home port before he signed up. He laughed about it at first, then stopped and never took the Periscope watch again. What you see can be a mirror, and mirrors do not always show what you expect. The last small incident I will record for this section was a frame that, taken by itself, would be an oddity. Taken in the company of the others, it became a line in a story none of us wanted to write. The Periscope camera caught on a gray dawn the outline of a face close to the lens, as if something came up out of the water to peer directly into the periscope. There was no mast in the frame, no deck, only that face and a ring of ripples. The captain put the frame away in his safe and told the officer of the deck to log the event in a separate book. The book was labeled with a simple rule: restricted, captain's log. We never saw the frame again. A face so close, it feels like the sea itself is trying to take your measure. The incident that broke the rule began on a morning colder than reason. We were running silent, battery only, diesel shut down, drifting beneath a layer of cold water that made the hull creak like a man grinding his teeth in his sleep. It was 04:11. Dawn was minutes away, but the sea outside felt wrong. Not visually. We weren't at Periscope depth. It felt wrong in the vibrations, in the hull's rhythm. Mechanics learn to read those rhythms like a doctor reads a heartbeat. That morning, something mimicked our heartbeat. The boat would hum, then the hum would echo back, delayed by about half a second, as if another vessel were shadowing us perfectly, matching our noise, returning our pulse back to us. But sonar showed nothing. No contact, no metallic reflection. Just the ocean. When the sea answers you with your own pulse, you either surface or you go mad. The captain chose the former. He ordered us to come to Periscope depth, a risky decision under any circumstances, suicidal near dawn. But the hum had unnerved him. His jaw locked, he gave the command, "Prepare the mast," but nobody looks through the periscope. We worked fast. The ballast tanks shifted. The boat rose. Water sheeted off the sail. The periscope extended. The captain stepped to the station, then stopped. He didn't look. He waited and waited. There's light outside. Too much light. It wasn't dawn yet. But the periscope head, the part above the water, was registering brightness like a midday glare. The captain checked the horizon indicator, the clock, the sun table. Impossible. We should have been in full darkness. Dawn had arrived early, but only through the lens. The captain froze. Then he called the senior officer. "Record the image. Do not look, only record." He hit the trigger. The periscope camera whirred. 5 seconds. He lowered the scope. "Secure the mast," he said quietly. His face was colorless. We gathered in the wardroom to view the recording. 8 men, a projector, a reel we weren't supposed to ever film. Corby dimmed the lights. The reel began. At first, everything looked normal. Horizon line, faint pre-dawn light, a few blurred waves, spray scattering the early sun. Then the light brightened, unnaturally fast, washing out the upper half of the image. And then it appeared, a shape, a silhouette, human, standing on the water. Not shimmering like a bird, not stretched like a reflection, standing. Its arms hung straight down, its posture stiff, its head tilted slightly, as if listening. We all leaned back at the same moment, an unconscious recoil. Then the figure moved, not walking, not swimming. It rotated, pivoted, like a cutout sliding in 2 dimensions. Its face turned toward the camera. We watched the screen. The screen watched back. A reflection does not turn to acknowledge you. The reel flickered. The figure grew, closer, closer, like it was rising. Suddenly, the screen filled with a face, inches from the periscope lens. But it wasn't a face in the normal sense. It was a mouth, a gaping mouth filled with nothing. No teeth, no tongue, no lips. Just a void stretching open, as if the entire horizon had become a wound. The reel snapped. Lights flickered on. The captain slammed the projector off. Nobody moved for a long time. Then the captain spoke quietly. "That is why you do not look through the periscope at dawn." We thought that was the end. It wasn't. Because the next dawn, the ocean called us. We were below periscope depth. No lens up, no watch on mast, no exposure. Yet at precisely 0420, the hull vibrated. 3 taps. Not metal on metal. Not pressure waves. Knocks, knock, knock. Every man in the boat froze. The sound repeated. Faster. Knock, 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 knock. Something was knocking from the sea. The captain ordered depth increased. Then more. Then more. But the knocking followed us down. Meters passed. Pressure rose. The ocean darkened. Still. Knock, knock, knock. Along the hull, like fingers feeling for an opening. You can ignore a voice. You cannot ignore a knock. The captain did the only thing a rational man could do. He ordered us to dive deep. Deeper than exercise protocols. Deeper than foxtrots were designed to go in peace. The hull groaned, metal flexing under the pressure like a rib cage under a knee. Then silence. We held our breath. Minutes passed. We stabilized. The knocking stopped. We had outrun dawn for a while. The next time the periscope was used officially was 3 days later, dusk, the safe hour. We needed a bearing check. The weather was clear, the sea flat, no anomaly expected. But the mechanic assigned to lubricate the periscope mast, a kid named Vitka, didn't return from his task. At first, we assumed he'd fallen asleep in the bilge. Then we assumed he was hiding. Then we checked the whole boat. He wasn't aboard. Not in the racks, not in the torpedo room, not in the engine spaces, not even in the bilges. The captain ordered an emergency muster. Vitka did not answer. Men whispered the impossible. He looked at the wrong time. He looked, and it saw him. A missing man is a technical problem until it becomes a message. Corby took it further. He accessed the maintenance log. The periscope had been lifted for exactly 8 seconds at 3:59 o'clock, moments before dawn. Nobody authorized it, nobody logged it, and nobody saw it. That night, someone slid a folded scrap of paper under my rack curtain. I opened it. In shaky handwriting, it waits for the eye. When the light rises, it rises too. No signature, just a small smear of salt water on the corner. 2 nights later, something pushed against the hull, not knocking this time. A long, dragging pressure, like a palm sliding slowly along the metal. Men woke from sleep gasping. Some swore they heard breathing in the passageways. Others swore they heard their own name whispered from inside the ventilation system. The captain hid the fear well, but he couldn't hide the new order. If dawn approaches and we are at depth, no one goes near the periscope.
If dawn approaches and we are at periscope depth, no one opens their eyes. We all looked at him confused. He clarified, voice barely audible. It only needs your eye. It only needs to know you're looking. The final breakdown happened at 04:16 on a day the ocean was dead calm. An alarm started ringing in control. Not one of our alarms, not mechanical, not electrical. It was the periscope warning bell, except the periscope wasn't raised. The mast was down, locked. We checked 3 times. Still the bell rang, a bright, sharp, chirping signal, as if somebody up top were manually swinging the periscope head into position. Then a voice crackled through the internal speaker, not human. A layered voice, like a dozen whispers stacked, and it spoke Russian in a tone that was far too precise. Raise the periscope. The captain shouted, "Do not raise!" The speaker cut him off, mimicking his voice perfectly. Raise the periscope. The room froze. When the sea learns your voice, you are already too late. The captain reached for the fuse panel, ripped the power from the mast controls. The voice in the speaker screamed, a metallic, distorted shriek, and the whole boat shuddered violently, as if something massive had slammed into our side. Lights flickered. The hull groaned. Water sprayed from a pipe seam. When the shutter stopped, the captain gave an order I'd never heard in my years below deck. Prepare to emergency surface, right now. We blew ballast. The boat shot upward. The bow broke through the water like a frightened animal gasping for air. The moment we hit the surface, something extraordinary happened. The dawn light vanished, just gone. The sky went gray and then black, like dawn had been erased. The captain stared at the horizon and whispered, "It followed us up." The official report later claimed mechanical failure, a jammed periscope alarm relay, a false reading brightness spike, a missing crewman lost during bilge maintenance. But the men who served know better. Some rules have teeth because they guard something real. Something old, something patient, something that rises when the light does. I left the Navy the year after. I never saw a periscope again, but sometimes, very rarely, I wake up before dawn, without reason, without sound, and in the dark of my bedroom, I feel the old submarine hull beneath my feet. Then, faintly, knock, knock, knock. Always just before sunrise, always waiting, and I keep my eyes closed, because the captain was right. Do not look through the periscope at dawn. Do not meet what waits in the light, and above all, never let dawn know you're watching.